afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Getting In, a college coach conversation. I'm excited to be here, my first podcast of 2024 as a host. Congrats to all of you seniors who submitted all of your applications. And today we're going to turn our attention to those who are in later stages, but in some cases, maybe just getting started. As a quick reminder, please like, share, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to have you on board for the ride. All right, we're going to talk a lot about athletics today, specifically recruitment and scholarships. But before we get to that, we're going to really focus on how to get started, especially with, in particular, with research. And I'm very excited to welcome my co-host, who I rarely get to speak with on the show because when I'm not hosting the show, he's off because then he hosts the show. That's Ian Fisher. He's a former admissions officer at Reed College. And we're going to talk research. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Beth. I told a producer, I said, I can also go on the show and be a guest and be an expert. I would be happy to do that. And I'm delighted that we get to do it here for your first hosting gig of 2024.
I love it. Always happy to see your face when we're talking about these different things.
Me too.
All right. So research, to me, research is the answer to almost everything, especially how do I get started? That's so like, if I know you and I have both experienced this, you pick up the phone, you get on the phone with a parent, and the first question they ask is like, where do I start? Where does my student start? So where do you suggest that students start?
I it it's important to look at the calendar and understand where we are, right? We still have nearly a year before many students will submit their applications, and that's a lot of time to conduct research. Now, if you wait till the last minute for any assignment, it's not going to go particularly well. That's especially true for the college research process. You want to spread this out as much as you can over many months. And the best place to start is to get acquainted with the opportunities that are out there, right? So it's really helpful to understand the differences between, say, a research university and a small liberal arts college.
Mhm.
It's really important to take a look at schools that have about 10 to 15,000 students and what their offerings might be in comparison to schools that have 20, 30, 40,000 students. By looking at some of these options, especially in your local area where you have access to schools that you can visit, where you might have some understanding of what they have to offer, you can create that initial framework for what colleges are conceptually, and then you can continue to build on that framework over many months as they come.
Right. I love it. I love that as kind of a framework for getting started in research. I think that's a great plan. I am curious, when you hear I need to do research, what's the first thing that pops into your mind? I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is the internet, which is added a completely new dimension to the entire college process that I will date myself by saying completely did not exist when I applied to college. Yeah. But I don't know that we don't want to limit research to the internet, right? So let's talk to me about the different ways you can research, and then maybe we can dig into the how of it all.
Right. And this is not just me or you kind of hanging on to the way that we did it as the best way to do it. Because when I was a student, I had a book that I used, that I read, that I took notes in, that I put sticky notes in as I was finding schools that I liked. Behind me, there's one book on my bookshelf that is lime green in color. It's the Fisk Guide to Colleges. And I tell just about every family with a junior in it that they should buy that book. So it is not expensive. And in it, there are 350 or so colleges with a full 2.5 page description of what that school has to offer, what makes it notable, and why students tend to choose it. Right. I think it's really great to start with a book. And the reason for that is that you're walking in where every school is being compared on the same terms. When you look at research on the internet, you're in a position where every school's website is a little bit different. The things that they focus on are going to be different. They're showing you their best side. They're not necessarily showing you everything that you need in order to understand. So a book is a great place to start because it can help you to get that foundation that we're talking about. And then you can use the internet to go and find very specific answers to the kinds of questions that you want to ask. Um, I want to just follow up. You said when you say when people tell you research, what do you think of? I typically think it's somebody who wants to go find some rankings and make it easy, right? So if I want to buy a
Mhm.
new phone, I'm going to go on and say, what's the best phone 2024? And there's going to be a pretty good answer there, and probably 3 or 4 things will pop up, and I'll choose the one that I like the best. But college research is not like that
Yeah.
because you and I are going to use our phones in very similar ways, but how different students are going to use a college experience is going to dramatically differ. So you got to avoid those ranking systems because they're going to point you towards one answer when in fact there may be many for you to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you and I are on record as being not fans of rankings. I'm sure that those
That's right.
people listening are thinking, well, that's nice, but we're still going to use them. But I do think you have to be, this isn't meant to be a thing, an anti-rankings thing, but you have to think about who's putting the rankings together. By the way, US News and World Report did that solely to sell magazines, and now basically that's all they do.
Yeah,
You
that's right.
know, that you have to imagine that their criteria are not your criteria. They're actually just kind of some random things that they chose that were designed to have a select group of schools kind of always appear at the top. And when they don't appear at the top, they rejigger their rankings so that they do.
Yeah,
That's all I want to say on that.
we gotta have Stanford up there. Something's got to be wrong if it's too far down the list. So let's
Exactly.
adjust the weighting of some different factors. So
That's exactly right.
that
So,
is what's happening.
yeah. So I would, if you take nothing away from this segment today, it's don't start with rankings. That's the only thing I think that we would probably be happiest if you took that away and didn't start with rankings.
That's fair.
Um, and very quickly, the other thing I just wanted to say was that you mentioned kind of visiting local schools. When I think research, I always think, going online, reading a book, doing things like that. But there's, in-person research as well. And that's doing some visits. And while these might not be schools that you're interested in or that you're going to apply to, sometimes there's value in just kind of getting that experience. Like you said, a small liberal arts college, a large research university, a medium-sized school, and seeing in real life what that looks like can be valuable.
100%.
So,
Yeah, and I think visiting is so great, and you don't have to come away from the school wanting to apply in order for the visit to have been valuable, right? You can still learn a lot. You can say that's not for me, but now I know why it's not for me. And
mhm.
as I'm continuing to do my research, I can look for schools that are better at the stuff that I want. And the stuff that I don't want, it doesn't matter if they're good at that or not, because that's not something I'm going to take advantage of. So a visit can really help you to clarify what your priorities and preferences are.
Right. When you were talking about kind of establishing that framework
Mm-hmm.
that can help you to guide your maybe your deeper research, what kinds of questions do you recommend that students be asking? Because I think sometimes too, students go online and they go to a school's website and they're like, well, I looked through the website and it was interesting. It looked great. People look like they're having fun.
Yeah.
And I think many of them kind of skip that part of what am I seeking out when I go online or even when I'm looking in a book?
Yeah, if you just go to a school website and you've got no real direction that you're giving yourself, you're going to find a lot of stuff to like. You'll find students having fun. You'll find a lot of great opportunities. You're going to find things that celebrate student achievements, whether it's research or internships. Colleges are really great at showing the stuff that they do well. You really got to get past that initial veneer, that first layer, and start to find some things that are more specific to you. So you got to go into any stage in research, except for that initial phase where you're reading about schools and getting kind of your foundation. You got to go in with a set of questions that matter to you. And I typically have students to ask them to break it into 2 categories. So you've got academic priorities, so things that matter to you from the learning experience. And then you've got non-academic priorities, things that matter to you from the overall experience of being there. So, for example, an academic priority might be, what is the method of instruction? So is this a school where there's a lot of project-based learning? Is it a place where there are small conference style classes? Are lectures primarily the mode of instruction? How do students actually get information? And if you think about that question in the context of what makes you a successful high school student,
Yeah.
that's really key, right? If I do well in classes where the teacher forces me to contribute to a discussion, and I need that accountability in order to be successful at the college level, well, then I got to look for schools that offer that as the dominant mode of instruction. If I'm someone that wants some experience when I graduate so that I can point to some actual professional experience as I enter the workforce, I want to look at schools that have internship programs and figure out what the success rate is for students who are looking for internships in order to land one and be able to do that as a part of their college career. So that's just a couple of examples. And I think you, as a student, you can have different kinds of preferences, but you want to get to that level of detail.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that oftentimes people go in, they look at the rankings first because they feel it's going to narrow things down for them. But what they wind up doing then is focusing on the same schools that everybody's focusing on rather than focusing on the schools that fit their criteria. Because again, as we mentioned, the rankings are using different criteria than your criteria. So
That's right.
so now you've got your basics and you've gone out, maybe you have researched, I mean, how many schools do you encourage students to be looking at? There's so many, right? There's more than 4,000. So what's a realistic number that you want to
Yeah.
be digging into?
It reminds me, our colleague Christine, she also assigns the FISC guide to students, and she told me she asked a student to buy the FISC guide, and he came to the next meeting and he said, "I finished it," and she was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, it was a lot. I read about a lot of colleges, but I finished." And she was like, "You read the entire book? You read every college?" And he said, "Yeah." Was I not supposed to do that? No, no, it's a resource. So not 300, not 350. That's a lot. I thought that was
Yes,
so funny. It was
that is
so
funny.
endearing too. It was like, "Oh, you asked me to get this book. I'd better read it."
Yeah.
Um, I think you want to be open to many possibilities, but I think that the number that you will probably read about carefully is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 35. So you'll start with a big list, you'll cast a wide net, but you'll start to research carefully 25, 35 schools. You might visit the websites for 20 schools with those specific questions that you have, and then cut that down to the 7 to 10 that we're looking for. So it's very much a funneling process where you start big, and at every phase, you're eliminating contenders from the list so that by the end, you've got your favorites. And of course, as you do that, Beth, you want to be mindful of which ones are more selective and which are less selective so that I'm not only ending up with the 8 Ivies and MIT and now I'm ready to apply to those
Yeah,
schools.
exactly. Where we will remind our listeners that less than 3% is the acceptance rate at some of those schools.
It's tough out
So
there.
yeah, it is tough out there for sure. And actually, if people are wondering about actually putting together a list, we've done a number of segments on the podcast in the past about where do you start putting together a list. And so really, we're less talking about putting your actual list together today and more talking about how do you dig into those schools that seem to be in line with you from the perspective of how you're doing in school, and then also in terms of what you want out of college, because that is the ideal. Those two things meeting together is kind of where the magic happens.
That's right.
Um, any any tips that you have in terms of using research to go from, let's say you've got 20 schools, but you know you only really want to apply to say 10.
Mm-hmm.
How do you dig a little deeper using research to get to that 10?
There are a couple of ways of doing this. I think one thing that's really key that I want to stress and want to emphasize is that as you're doing this, you want to take notes. So if you spend an hour one night researching a school and you've got your questions in mind that you're looking for, and you go to these different pages on their website and you find the information, but then you don't actually track it for yourself, the
Yeah.
next day when you wake up, you're not going to remember all that stuff. There are too many colleges. They're going to tend to bleed together. And so it's very important that you come up with some sort of a note-taking system. I encourage students to just create a spreadsheet where they can put in their thoughts of a school as they're researching that school. So that's really key because it allows you, to your question, to look back and to make comparisons between different institutions. I also encourage students to just give a school a gut ranking or a grade after they've researched it that first time. And you can adjust it. But if I go to a website and I love the school, I love everything I'm reading, maybe I give it an A. If I'm kind of lukewarm, but I see the possibilities here, maybe it's a C for me. And so if I look at my 20 schools that I've researched, I'm going to keep all the A's. I'm going to grab those B's And then maybe there's one or two C's that I'll keep around, but the D's and the F's, they're out of there, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so I think that's a really easy way to do it. And then for the students that are really analytically inclined, sometimes I'll have them rate the school on each of their subcategories, right? So all of your academic factors and all of your non-academic factors, and then create an average. And maybe it's on a 10-point scale. And so you can go nuts with this if you're really interested in data, and you can factor in a lot of different things and see how those schools stack up. But Beth, when I've had students do that, they'll find that the school that is not MIT is the top ranked school, and then they change their rankings in order to
Yes.
make sure that MIT gets there. So you see students doing it in real time.
Yeah, literally was about to say, and be honest with your rankings and
You
don't
have to.
doubt them when they turn out
Yeah,
because, I don't know, we could do 5 shows on the importance of paying attention to what really matters to you and worrying less about the brand name, and we'd be talking into the ether.
I think so.
Any last thoughts as we kind of wrap up this segment on research?
Yeah, the last thing to say is that your research, first of all, is work and it is part of the process. A lot of students think this is just something I have to do. My counselor's asking me to do it. My parents are asking me to do it. It creates value for you. It makes your application better. And I will tell you, even students that I've had that have gotten into their ED school, they have the best and most successful students have done a lot of research across many schools and have come up with a plan where that ED school is clearly their number one choice
Yeah.
because of that research process. And they don't ever feel like they wasted their time in investigating those schools.
Right.
The last little bit to remind folks of is a lot of schools have supplemental essays. Why do you want to come to this college? And if you are not looking at your notes as you're writing that essay, it's a missed opportunity. You've done so much work to research schools, put that information into your writing to support your application.
Exactly, because the reality is you actually do have really good reasons for why you want to attend that school. But if you don't add them to that essay and all you're saying in the essay is you're such a great school, I love you, then you're not making that connection. You're not showing the colleges how much you've actually done. So,
That's right.
Ian, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for getting up early and joining the show today as a guest. I really appreciate it.
It's so good to see you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You too. Absolutely. All right. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking all things athletics. So don't go away.